2018 will now come to order. Please stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we have roll call, please?
Chairman Williams,
Here.
Vice Chairman Shavir,
Here.
Secretary Chambers, Member Faison, Dr. Faison, Member Baker, Member Ritchie, Member Noel Copeland, School Board Member Hare.
And we have a quorum. Next is approval of minutes from May 2nd, 2018. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the minutes from June 6, 2018.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must first fill out the oath card. I've done this so many years and I just still flub it up. The oath card to be heard on the agenda item and sign the oath card contained thereon. These cards are located on the table near the entrance to the council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to procedures adopted in Resolution 24-1997. Those in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on an item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents you desire the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Staff, has all items been properly advertised?
Yes, they have.
And has anybody on the board had the opportunity to speak to anybody in the public or anybody speak to anybody about the items coming before us or visit any of the items coming before us?
No.
Okay, with that, I'd like to make a request. We don't have any special staff here, do we, right?
No, I was just gonna let the commission know that item 9C, the conditional use permit, and item 9F, we do have people in the audience for if you'd like to rearrange.
C? Okay, yeah, I was gonna see about moving C, not C, but, yeah, move C and E. So I guess it's C and F then. Yeah, I was gonna see about moving C and F to the front of the meeting, if the commission is acceptable to that, since I know that we were gonna have people here for that. So with that,
Which item is that on here?
that is conditional use permit, C,
Thank you.
and then F, Willow Creek. Would you like us to take a vote on that, to move it?
So-
Okay. So, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Fair enough? Okay.
Okay.
Just trying to make it easier for you guys. You would have waited a very long time with one of these items.
Yeah.
So,
So to start then with item 9C, that begins on page 39 of your packet, and it should be bookmarked in the PDF that is on the laptops in front of you there. So this is a conditional use permit for to establish an indoor play area, which is considered by the land development regulations a recreation and commercial amusement indoor. The proposed facility will be located within an existing unit of the Titusville Mall, which is located at 3550 South Washington Avenue within the Regional Commercial Zoning District. The proposed indoor play area will be approximately 2,400 square feet in area. However, staff is recommending that the approval be allowed for the use to occupy space up to 4,000 square feet, just to provide flexibility if the operator of the business would prefer to move within the mall at a later date. No expansion of the existing building is proposed as part of the request, and the use will utilize the existing parking and ingress and egress points for vehicular access to the property. And if you'll recall, we had a couple meetings ago a very similar CUP request for the Titusville Mall as well. There was no objections from any of the staff, and like I said, the only thing that I really wanted to note is that we are recommending that the approval is for a space up to 4,000 square feet, although they will only be occupying 2,400 square feet for the time being. And with that, I'll try to answer any questions.
let's open this up to the public. Well, and then, do you have cards on this?
Yes. Lisa McCotter.
Okay.
Lisa McCotter, my address is 36 3675 Muirfield Drive in Titusville. I am the general manager of Titusville Mall, and I have been working with the owner, the husband and wife to the left, or the husband. They are the owners of the new store going in. And, well, it's not really a store, but we're very excited to have them. They are a wonderful young family who is creating a space for other young families. So the space will be used for the younger kids from elementary down to toddler, and they've created different spaces for each age, and we'll separate them. From the mall's point of view, we are very excited to see the youth in our community. I consider them youth, they're my kids' age. We love that they have actually recently moved to our area, and that they are willing to invest in Titusville as they raise their own children. And from a grandmother's point of view, I'm really excited to have a place to take my own grandchildren that's not the bowling alley for games. So it's indoor, which means they can be cool and comfortable, and I think it's going to be wonderful for Titusville. One other thing, since we're expanding, I'm wondering if they did want to expand, would it be possible to go up to 5,700 square feet? We have another suite that possibly one day they've already looked at. If things go well, if they would be able to expand into that larger suite. If not, we'll take 4,000.
That's something that the commission can certainly entertain. I don't foresee any issues in terms, because the infrastructure's already there. I don't foresee any issues with that in terms of, access or anything like that. So that would be something that if the commission is comfortable with that, I don't have any immediate objections to
Just put that in the motion.
If you would like to, sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank
Wait a
you.
minute, hold on.
Oh.
Vice Chairman Shabir had questions.
Okay.
I have a question. Down at the Merritt Square Mall, there are some activities for kids that are in the main corridor of the mall. I'm assuming that this is not the case here?
No, this is suite number 24. It's enclosed. It has an entrance to the mall, which is the entrance they'll use. It also has a back entrance that goes out to the parking lot. But no, this is not. This is located in a storefront.
So describe to me what you're going to have in there when you say a play area. I mean, exactly what is this going to look like?
Well, they have, do you know what bouncy houses are?
Mm-hmm.
They have bouncy houses, different sizes to accommodate different ages. They have, a small little climbing wall for little people, and they have like a jungle gym. They are setting up an area to do birthday parties. They're not gonna do any kind of cooking, no food, although they do have like a vending machine. I think I'm really impressed that they even have a nursing room for nursing moms. So I just feel like they've really accommodated this age group really well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay,
Anything else?
that's it.
Okay,
Thank you. Do we have any other cards?
Yes, two more. Christy Jones.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Christy Jones. Any information I need to tell you before I start?
No?
Okay.
I think we're good.
My husband and I are going to be opening this business, and we're very excited about it. We have a son who has special needs, and we believe that the community could really use something like this, not only for typical kids, but for kids with special needs, sensory processing issues and things like that, just to get their energy out, have somewhere safe that's, enclosed. That's a huge thing for moms, especially of multiples, to have somewhere to play. I just wanted to introduce myself and tell you guys we're very excited about it. That's about it.
Thank you. I have a question, Vice Chairman Shabir.
Let me ask you about, are you going to have trained medical staff there? I mean, I don't know how many kids you plan on having, but it sounds like a pretty big area.
Well, we will have like a typical first aid kit and things like that. I do have, personally, I have a CNA certificate. I also have an EMT certificate myself, and I have worked in the medical field a little bit, not a lot. But other than myself, I'm not exactly sure what all my staff will already come in with. I would prefer for them to be CPR trained and things like that. So we may try and find an outside facility for them to go take those classes. Although I do know that, like, I have an IA, instructional assistant that works at Oak Park Elementary that is going to be one of my main staffers. And I'm fairly certain she's already equipped with that skill.
I was just wondering, the state doesn't require you to, X number of kids, you have to have maybe somebody, a medical trained in some.
I
I'm
don't
not
think-
aware. I'm not aware
This
of
isn't
it.
considered a daycare, so.
Yeah,
there's
it's not a
different
daycare.
requirements.
The parents will be at the facility under their parents' supervision. They will sign a waiver, saying they're aware that their child could possibly get hurt. But
you.
something I will definitely look into.
Thank you.
Any other
I
questions?
guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Quentin Jones?
okay. All right, that's good. All right, so we'll close this to the public. Member Noel Copeland, you had a question for staff?
I did. Does this kind of a tenant in the mall, does that make it difficult or impossible for other tenants to be near them? Are there any restrictions within the mall? If they're in a certain space, does that mean another kind of business could not be next to them because it is a child?
In terms of, from a zoning standpoint, no. So long as the use is allowed by the zoning code, it doesn't matter the proximity in which they're located. There may be requirements from the Florida Building Code that require certain types of separation, but that's mainly typically to deal with fire codes and life safety issues. That will be something that I can't.
No, I mean like a type of business.
Not that I'm aware of.
Can a Spencer's Gift be next to the Little Ninjas?
We don't have
Play
anything.
park.
Yeah, we don't. In terms of that kind of stuff, we don't have anything like that in our.
I know
land
there's not
regulations.
now. I'm
Yeah,
just wondering if it creates a restriction for future tenants.
not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Since this property or this use is not classified as a daycare, it wouldn't fall under one of the typical exemptions that the state legislation puts out there for bars and nightclubs and things like that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, I'm glad to see something going in there to replace, was it the studio? Is that the studio that was there?
No, we're still working on that one. This
Oh.
is separate.
Okay. We used to get Amish,
Oh, your Amish jams.
oh, that's my favorite. Okay, so with that, is there a motion on this? And one of the requests was to move it up to 5,700?
If the commission so chooses. Yeah, that was the.
Whoever making the motion, if you want to take that under
I
consideration.
move to approve this, let's see, conditional use permit number 3-2018 at the upper level of 5,700 square feet.
50
5,700, right?
Yes. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, can we take a vote on this?
Member Baker?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. All right, well, congratulations. Now you have one more. Most important part is to go to city council, so, and when does this go before city council?
This will be before city council next Tuesday.
All right, there you go.
Thank you.
Good luck.
You'll have to come visit.
I just might. I actually have a grandson as well, so this would be good to bring him to.
Thank you for moving us up too.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, next item.
Okay, so the next item that we rearranged, the Willow Creek sketch plat, that begins on, let's see, I think I still have an old version, because I'm saying it's on page 225, which we don't have that many pages anymore. But it's item 9F.
214, maybe? I thought that was the end of,
Oh, sorry. Oh, that's right. Okay, so it is 225 of your packet. My apologies. So this is the sketch plat for Phase 1 of Willow Creek, which is located kind of in the far southern area of the city. It is for 61. It's a 61 lot subdivision on approximately 36.14 acres. It's located east of State Road 407 and west of Grissom Parkway. In 2016, this portion of the Willow Creek area was rezoned in order to allow the construction of single-family homes. The overall Willow Creek project will be approximately 675 acres, and later in 2016, the remainder of the property was rezoned as part of a planned unit development to allow a maximum of 1,277 residential units and 172 acres of commercial and light industrial uses. And so the sheets on the following pages basically lay out the proposed subdivision. And this is just, as I said, a sketch plat, so this is just phase, like step one of our platting process. This will then have to move forward into engineering before any construction can begin. And with that, I'll try and answer any questions.
Okay, let's open this to the public. Mr. Honeycutt?
Good evening, Rodney Honeycutt, 3700 South Washington Avenue here in Titusville. And so, as staff described, the project gets the sketch plat approval, which is like the first step in, for 61 lots in Willow Creek subdivision. And so I don't really have anything else much to add, but I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions of Mr. Honeycutt? Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Well, let's close this meeting to the public. And is there any questions for staff? No, it's pretty straightforward. So I'm glad to see this moving forward. So, all right. So, is there a motion on this item? Vice Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the Willow Creek sketch plat.
Is there a second? I can't make a second on this, and I can't pass the gavel because he made a motion, so.
I'll second.
Okay. Can we have a roll call on this?
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for moving us up.
So we will go to the top.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and just start back then with item 9A?
Nobody's here, so.
Okay. If I could get the presentation pulled up on screen there. And actually, so this may take just a minute, but we have the ability for the laptops up there to show the presentation, so it's a little bit clearer than on the, are you guys good? Do you want to be able to see the presentation right on your laptop, or are you okay? Okay. Okay, then. This is a presentation about form-based codes and just also some general updates on projects we've been working on. And so this was brought about as part of the ongoing EAR amendment for the comp plan and things such as that. Representatives from the city's consultants, Cannon and Associates, presented a proposed restructure of the comprehensive plan with new policies that reflect the vision document adopted in January of 2018. The policies recommend the adoption of a form-based code for the downtown and urban design guidelines for commercial gateways. And so to give you a little bit of a summary, so the staff worked on reorganizing the land development regulations. As you remember, that was basically not a lot of changes, but a lot of restructuring to the LDRs, and that was done in October of 2016 and became effective in about mid-2017. Then moving forward, as part of the required evaluation and appraisal report that is required by the state, we conducted a visioning exercise, and the goal from that was to establish long-term planning goals from the perspective of the public, which was completed in late 2017, and it was adopted by council in January of this year. And then with the comprehensive plan, our goal with that is to ensure that the comprehensive plan is compliant with the state statutes, and it also implements the vision that was adopted by City Council earlier this year. And so the visioning results produced a variety of different outcomes, but there were three main focus areas as part of this, which were downtown, the waterfront, and the gateways. Another thing that really we heard a lot of through the visioning exercise was the desire for quality development, especially along the corridors. Things that are aesthetically pleasing, accessible to all users, and diversifying the types of buildings that we have. getting away from the typical single-use strip centers and those sorts of development patterns. And a third thing that really was summed up well by the consultant and helps implement the first two items, which is placemaking. And that is, creating places that people like to spend time, addressing alternative transportation modes, and activating underused assets that the city currently has. And so there are a variety of different tools that will be used to implement the vision. Some of them I have listed here. One of the things that has been recommended by our consultant on this project and several other projects is a downtown form-based code, which I will get into in a minute as to what a form-based code entails. Gateway design guidelines and strategic plans to implement the comprehensive plan. And so basically, bicycle and pedestrian plans, resiliency plans, and neighborhood or special area plans. And those types of strategic plans are good to bridge the gap between the very overarching level that the comp plan establishes and the more specific needs of an individual area or an individual topic, such as transportation issues. Some of the other items that may need to be updated to address these issues are the community redevelopment area plan, as I mentioned, specific neighborhood plans, and specific corridor plans that address annexation on those areas of the city where the city limits line is not well defined, is kind of all over the place. And so form-based code defined, this is basically the definition of a form-based code from the Form-Based Codes Institute. I'm sure you guys will get very tired of me saying form-based code over and over. A form-based code is a land development regulation that fosters predictable built results in a high-quality public realm by using physical form rather than separation of uses as the organizing principle for the code. And form-based codes address the relationship between building facades and the public realm and the form and mass of buildings in relationship to one another. And what that gets at is kind of broken down in this table here. So under a conventional zoning code, which is more or less what we have here, conventional zoning was brought about to separate incompatible uses, and that has, over the years, about 100 years, been taken to the type of codes that you see now. And so conventional zoning typically creates single-use pods of development, whereas form-based codes promotes mixed use, and that's not just mixed use in terms of, vertical mixed use. It also promotes how a mix of uses can work well together, even if they're not stacked right on top of each other, but they're located adjacent to each other. Conventional zoning uses buffers instead of transitions. Again, that sticks with the whole continue to separate uses that may be deemed as not compatible with each other. And form-based codes prescribe transitions instead of buffers necessarily. So it recognizes the need to protect existing buildings, or it's not necessarily appropriate to put a 10-story building next to a single-family home. So you would set up transitions to help establish those kinds of those sorts of things. Conventional zoning is mostly auto-oriented. It's pretty self-explanatory. Form-based codes, because they address the street environment, they are inherently pedestrian and transit friendly, and they still accomplish accommodating the automobile. Typical conventional zoning, basically everything, I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of things are built for planned obsolescence. That's why a lot of the big box stores, that sort of thing, they last about 20, 30 years, and then they're pretty much ready to be demolished and rebuilt, either with something of the same nature or something different. And form-based codes are planned to endure because the buildings are designed to accommodate a wide variety of uses. Again, as I just mentioned, conventional zoning, a lot of times properties when they're redeveloped are basically just everything's demolished and they start from scratch each time. And buildings typically constructed under a form-based code accommodate change of uses, so they can go from retail to a restaurant to an office to maybe a school or something like that, all within the same building. And under conventional zoning and single-use buildings, the value of a development often drops when the intended use is no longer viable because the building sits vacant and starts to deteriorate and those sorts of things. And under form-based code, the value of development holds when the intended use is no longer viable, because even, as I just said, even if it was intended to be a retail establishment, the building can be reused as an office. So it's not just a single use, and therefore the intended use isn't the only use of that building. Again, kind of to put it in perspective, conventional zoning focuses on use first and form as kind of as an afterthought, whereas form-based codes prioritize the form of structures, and which it does help to dictate what uses are allowed. And a lot of times the concern with the form-based code is that you will just have no control over what uses are allowed or not allowed, and that's not the case. It just doesn't prioritize the use as the first method of regulation. You can still certainly prohibit uses where you know they're not going to be appropriate and those sorts of issues, and you can address those through a form-based code. And so with conventional zoning, basically you have density of the use, the floor area ratio, setbacks, parking, et cetera, and that creates what you see on screen there. Basically establishes a box that you can build within, and so long as you're within that box and you don't exceed the height, you can go forth and build what you want. Under a set of design guidelines, it still more or less establishes a box of where you can build, and it adds another level of detail of how many openings have to be available on the building, and in terms of that, meaning windows, doors, the transparency of the first floor, what kind of architectural treatments may be needed on certain size structures, that sort of thing. And then a form-based code really goes into creating a fine grain of how buildings interact with each other, interact with the street, and they establish more stringent guidelines that rather than a setback, a minimum setback, they may have a maximum setback or a build-to line, which a build-to line means that you basically, the front of the building has to be a specific distance from the street. And so that, it really gives a high level of control to what the built environment looks like, and that it does a very good job of creating pedestrian-friendly environments, which is why it's been recommended several times for the downtown area. And so the main elements of a form-based code, there is a regulating plan, which looks pretty similar to a zoning map. It basically has, the street grid laid out, and it has certain, where certain build-to lines are established, where certain heights are allowed, those sorts of things. The public standards, which are, if I would use my notes. The public standards are basically they specify elements in the public realm, such as sidewalks, travel lanes, on-street parking, street trees, basically anything in the public right-of-way, those sorts of things. Building standards, which are regulations that control the features, configurations, and functions of buildings that define and shape the public realm. Administration is exactly that. How is the code administered? How do developers interact with it, and how do staff enforce the code? And definitions, this is seems like it's more important than one thinks. It's basically a well-defined set of or a very comprehensive set of definitions allows staff to be very clear, and it creates a very clear and concise code. So there's little question, and that's good for staff when we're implementing, and it's also good for developers in that they know exactly what to expect. One of the things that that was brought up last year, I went to a form-based code administration training, was that uncertainty actually does more harm to projects than having a very clear process. A lot of times when jurisdictions begin the process of adopting a form-based code, everyone thinks, oh my gosh, this is so stringent that no one will ever want to, we're gonna run off all development. But when a developer knows exactly what to expect through the development process and what we expect, we being the city, it makes it clear, and so they know what to plan for, and it kind of takes out those unknown variables, and it actually, if the market is right, can really help get projects off the ground if they don't have to go through multiple public hearing processes and get things off the wall comments that really catch them off guard and those sorts of things. So while it seems like they're very rigid and regimented, it's actually better kind of for everyone that way. Another reason that this plays well, that a form-based code will play well into what we're working on, at least in the downtown and potentially, as I mentioned, to go further down the corridors. What you see here is this is a map that was created by FDOT, and what they have started to do is inventory all of the roadways within, they're going to do it throughout the state, but our district is starting in the northern section of Volusia County and heading south. and they are classifying all of their roadways as one of these context-sensitive classifications. So it goes all the way from a C1, which is a natural roadway, very rural sort of thing, all the way up to an urban core, which would be downtown Orlando, downtown Tampa, those sorts of things. So we more than likely within the city are somewhere in the C2T, the rural town, up to about the C5 range. But we're not going to have any C6 here within the city. We just don't have that kind of density and those sorts of things, which is perfectly fine. But this is very similar to what a regulating plan in a form-based code is. So we're trying to get the city's regulations to be on the same page and speak the same language as the other jurisdictions that we deal with, because FDOT controls US 1, they control Garden Street, Cheney Highway. So the more we can speak the same language, hopefully the goal is to produce a better end product out of that. And when we ask them for certain things, we have the plans in place to help back up what we're asking for. And it's not just we would like this, it's we've really, this is something that the city truly is interested in. And so these are just some examples, and the words on there are not important. Really, what I included this slide for is that the table on the right-hand side of the screen there is a table from one of our zoning districts that we currently have in the LDRs, and the table on the left is something that is very common that you see in a form-based code. And so even through the land development regulation rewrite process, we were anticipating moving forward with these sorts of changes. And so we're trying to implement these sort of tables that make information very short and succinct and clear. And so we have some of these in the code, and we would like to continue moving forward with that if we get to go ahead to move forward with the form-based code. And so just some examples of other areas with form-based codes here in Florida. There are several. Delray Beach has been able to, through the use of their CRA and a form-based code, they have really turned around the area of Atlantic Avenue. They've seen a lot of new development there in the past 10 years, and it's a very walkable environment. It's very active. All day on the weekends there are people out shopping, eating, enjoying the open spaces that they have along there. And so like I said, it's not going to create a market that doesn't exist. No regulation will do that, but it does allow for people to take advantage of when the market is right, to come in and produce a development that is acceptable and good for the city and for them. And so there have been several plans that have been adopted over probably the past 10 years, if not more. The University of South Florida Strategic CRA Vision, that is basically the current CRA plan. They discuss urban design, transforming the streets, and creating pedestrian-friendly and active environments. The recently adopted Economic Development Strategic Plan discusses efficient and predictable land development regulations and revisiting the LDRs that are focused on downtown revitalization and the US 1 corridor. And then, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, the Titusville Tomorrow vision that was produced by our consultant and was adopted by City Council also talks about placemaking, and it also recommends a form-based code to revitalize downtown. And so I just wanted to give you a brief kind of get the conversation started, because this is something that we're going to ask City Council if they agree we should pursue. The level of how much it would actually affect would certainly have to still be determined, but this is kind of the direction that we as staff would like to go, especially for the downtown. We think it would be a big benefit and allow for quality redevelopment in the downtown that would benefit everyone. And so with that, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you have.
We've seen this before, perhaps not in the same format.
Sure.
But we've had the visioning process, which went on for a couple of years. And so I'm curious, when I was reading this, you're going to put this into code? I mean, how is this going to be presented to council? How is this going to be officially acknowledged and put on the record for the city?
So more than likely, the process for that would be to give them a presentation, maybe this presentation, and get their direction as to if this is something that they would be interested in staff exploring. And if that is the case, we would likely engage a consultant for that. the process to implement a form-based code is that there is a lot of public input in the front, because that's basically how you determine what the residents want the city to look like, because that's what the form-based code achieves, is they achieve physically on the ground what they would like to see, what types of buildings, what kind of street amenities, those sorts of things. So it heavily relies on public input. And so before this is ever presented in any kind of draft form to you all or to the city council, we would need to go get direction from city council that, yes, we agree that this is a direction that we would like for you to pursue and to move forward with that. And throughout that, there would likely be workshops with this body, also with city council, to make sure that everyone understands the ins and outs and the functionality of a form-based code. Although staff will be the ones applying it, everyone needs to understand that, the mechanics of how this type of code works. And so this isn't something that you're just going to get out of the blue of, hey, this is what we're presenting. There will be a significant public outreach portion of it.
Based on what I read, okay, and tell me if I'm in the ballpark, okay? This is more returning to the old way of building a neighborhood. Only in the old days, you didn't have code. People just,
That's just how they built.
they just how they built. But if my reading is correct, when you have this form-based, okay, you will be able to have, instead of separating businesses for different areas, you're going to integrate them. And they're going to be perhaps placed in areas that are compatible with each other, as opposed to being, how will I say, regimented, you will do this. In other words, you're going to allow businesses, and businesses will choose what they want.
Sure.
But it will fit into the architecture of the building, of the plans, of
Right.
the streetscape, and the city will say, okay, this is a business that we authorize, and it's part of our, we can regulate it through our code, but you're not going to dictate where you can put the actual business.
Right, we're not gonna say that, this one block can only have restaurants on it. If you wanna do anything else, sorry. It won't be like that. It's, like you said, so long as the use will fit into the prescribed standards for the architecture and the building for layout and those sorts of things, so be it. Go in there and operate your business and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, it doesn't get quite to that level of detail. Now that, it may be that we say that certain streets do have to have a non-residential component on the first floor, where we're trying to create an active street environment. We may say you can't have a residence on the first floor, but that's really about the level that a form-based code stops in dictating exactly what use can go in what particular building.
So, getting back to, the original plan for Titus Landing was apartments, buildings above, shops down below. And so this type of plan will encourage that. And if a developer came in and said, this is what we're going to do, then city's going to say, okay, fine, do it.
Right.
I mean, that's the end of the conversation, except for the code that it normally calls.
Right, so long as you can meet those requirements of the code, yeah, there wouldn't be any other public hearing process involved, essentially, because that's why there's such a heavy public input component up front when one of these codes is drafted, is that you take the variable away of all the public hearings for every specific development that comes in. Now, that's not to say that, let's say you adopt a form-based code, and 10 years later, everyone recognizes, okay, there's been changes in the environment, maybe we should go back and take a look at what these regulations really are. It's not that they're set in stone forever, of course, but yeah, it takes a lot of the public hearings away that basically to create a more clear regulatory environment.
So if a developer came in, how would this work if a developer came in and he sees a commercial property and it's backed up to residential?
So that would be, the code can be written in many different ways, but if we're gonna do a hypothetical, if someone wanted to do a commercial development in close proximity to an existing residential or something like that, it goes back into that talk of transitions. So it would make sure that the building height and the form either steps down to be a compatible level. So if there's a one-story home or, even a townhome, you may have to have along the front street of where that commercial development is, maybe they can do 3 stories. But in between there, they will have to step the building down as a common way to adjust that. So you might have 3 stories down to 2 stories down to 1. And so it creates kind of a harmonious pattern that it doesn't look out of place. The commercial property owner can still develop how they would like, but the owner of the single family home doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I have this ridiculously large building right next to my house now. And so that's kind of the way that that would work. And we would also encourage too that put your commercial use right along the main street and maybe add in some additional residential right next to the existing residential to kind of further that transition. It's a smaller scale, it's a similar use, and that creates, the least amount of conflicts for everybody involved.
But it sounded, actually, I liked it. I was kind of, my first reading of it, I thought, hey, this might really work. This might be a really cool way to transition into something new.
A lot of places are going to this, and like I said, you could obviously do hypotheticals all day, but the code can take so many different forms that that's why we would just seek direction from council and do a lot of updating to both this body and to city council to make sure that the direction we're going and the public input has been well presented and well documented, and we get an end product that ultimately achieves the goal that people would want to see.
How long do you think, since this is a new concept, okay, basically what you're introducing to us, how does it work when you start out and you implement this code? What happens to the existing building? I mean, how do you integrate what's already here with something that is a new, not a new concept necessarily, but a new implementation?
Understood, yeah, and that will be one of the more difficult parts. I really can't give you a straightforward answer on that, because that's really going to depend on how the public and city council, how they want to accomplish that. Some places are very stringent and just say that as soon as one business moves out and there's a change of use, you have to bring that whole entire site up to conformance, which can be very expensive for a property owner, because now you have a usable building, but as soon as you go to change that, now you have to build something entirely new. Or it could be that those existing buildings could remain there until they either need to be torn down or they get damaged, and then they have to be rebuilt. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and so I don't want to say what is best or worse, because there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. But it's kind of how quickly you want a vision like that to be achieved will sometimes dictate how you address those existing buildings that don't meet what is now the new standard.
Member Baker.
I've got a whole bunch of questions, if my voice will hold out. First one is, how often is the visioning process?
For something like a form-based code?
Well, I know you've held them numerous times. How often, what is the interval between?
So what we did for the comprehensive plan was not nearly, it was a public outreach and more or less a visioning, but it was at a totally different scale than what something like this would be for a form-based code. The visioning exercises that we did for the comp plan, we talked about all areas of the city, existing neighborhoods, the waterfront, downtown, the industrial area. So we covered literally the entire city. When you do the public outreach for a form-based code, it's advertised in such a way, and people come in with the understanding that they are literally only talking about maybe 10 or 15 square blocks and really trying to figure out. So you're at a much finer grain detail in terms of what types of open space would you like to see, what types of trees are maybe appropriate to produce shade and that sort of thing. So the goal really with a form-based code is you do a lot of public outreach and a lot of public input right up front, and then you write the code to achieve that, and then it can be done how often as you want, but the goal would be the longer you wait, the longer that code has time to produce the outcome that people want. So the goal is to do a very robust public outreach up front and then maybe not touch it for decades if it works out that way.
Okay, I think you're getting a little more concise in your answer than I'm looking for a bigger thing here. What I'm looking for is, was this time that you did the visioning, was it specifically for form-based code?
No, the previous visioning that we just did was for the citywide, just the comprehensive plan.
Okay. How often do you do that?
That's really up to the jurisdiction, to be honest. I know the last time they did an ear-based report, they did a visioning exercise, and we as staff thought about not doing a visioning, but I'm actually glad that we did, because there were some details that were different, but a lot of the overarching goals or the issues that people kept bringing up have been the same across, from what I can tell, the past several visioning exercises, and that is continually the shoreline and the health of the Indian River Lagoon, aesthetics along the corridors, and of course downtown. And so I'm glad that we did the visioning in that respect, because it again just reaffirms that those items still need to be addressed. They're not at a place where, based on what we've heard from the public, that everybody's happy with them. So they continue to need attention. But it truly is completely up to the jurisdiction. There isn't a set best practice for how often to do visioning.
So when you say the jurisdiction, who's mandating the visioning meetings?
So in this case, we as staff recommended that we do a visioning, and City Council agreed to it. However, City Council said, you know what, we think we have a clear enough picture of what people want. We wouldn't have pursued that direction. So at the end of the day, it's City Council that ultimately makes that call.
Okay. You started talking about this, excuse me, the downtown form-based code. So this is, if it was decided that this is what the city wanted to pursue, I heard you say at the very beginning of the meeting something about, or maybe it was right before the meeting started, I don't remember exactly when you said it, something about having to finalize exactly where the line would be on some of the places, because some is a little fuzzy.
Sure. And so, yeah, as part of, and actually that is part of the form-based code will be applied basically just, it will have a hard and fast boundary at the edge of it, just like any other zoning district would. We haven't determined that yet because we haven't even received direction to move forward, but it would likely be for the downtown, possibly the area a little bit west of downtown, kind of along Main Street in that area. But again, we'll have to wait and see what actually comes out of any direction that council gives us before we can even talk about setting a specific area up.
So you said that, I guess I'm still fuzzy about some of this. It's something that, and you gave us names of cities that already have this. Is this something that a form-based code, is it written by the state or something that we would have to use their model?
No, not at all.
Things can be changed?
This is totally, there are good and bad examples of form-based codes that a variety of cities across the country have adopted, but there is no state mandate or anything like that we have to have a form-based code. This would be something that we would elect to go into just as, you know, that would only affect the city of Titusville. And we can draft, there aren't any set guidelines on that. We can draft the code basically however we see fit. So it's not as regimented as the comprehensive plan, where the state mandates specific items be included in the comprehensive plan and things like that. We have more flexibility.
Okay, what about the height of the buildings?
That's something that can certainly be addressed as well through this process. It certainly, height absolutely plays a factor into the form of buildings, and not just buildings, but also how the street feels to a pedestrian as they go by. Streets that are lined by 3 to 5 story buildings feel entirely different than streets that are lined by 10-story buildings. And so that's something that would certainly be addressed as part of that.
Okay, and what if you had a situation where you have a child care next to an adult business or medical marijuana or a bar, if it doesn't matter except for the facade of the building?
So as I said, the adoption of a form-based code doesn't just throw out that we don't care what uses are located next to each other. The required state mandate of, a school being X number, 500 feet or however many feet away from an establishment that serves alcohol, like a bar or something like that, all of those types of regulations would still absolutely be in place. And we can set up specific standards like that still play into the form-based code, but you still recognize that certain uses really aren't necessarily appropriate next to each other. So you still absolutely have the ability to do that, even if you adopt a form-based code. And you can even prohibit certain uses if you don't want them, just like we do now. It may not be necessarily appropriate to allow something that's going to be like a nuisance, a use that will cause nuisances. You can still prohibit that, even if they say they can fit within that building footprint. If it's going to cause nothing but nuisance issues for everyone around there, those kind of uses can still be prohibited.
My last comment is just kind of, there's some of this that I think would be a wonderful thing but I just have a real concern about Titusville ending up looking like any of these cities on this list, personally. I think people come here because, as a matter of fact, I know quite a few people who have moved to Titusville because they don't like living in areas like this.
Sure.
And so I just think we need to be very, very careful about ruining what we have, basically.
No, I completely understand, and by no means did I provide those examples to say that we should tailor a form-based code to look like the cities that I listed on here. Another one of the things that we heard a fair amount of through the comprehensive plan visioning process was that people, like you said, they like the small town kind of character and charm that the city has, and you can certainly, actually you can enhance that kind of characteristic through a form-based code by controlling that, you know, we don't want 10-story buildings everywhere. We maybe want 3-story, and that's what we like, and that's what, you know, that's what people feel comfortable in. So through a form-based code, you can control all of that. You can set minimums, you can set maximums, and and really control the final outcome of the built environment better so than just having a traditional zoning code. And so I completely understand what you're saying, and that has been mirrored through the input that we've gotten from the other projects we've been working on. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chairman Shabir?
We were talking about Hopkins Avenue, putting in streetscape, and I don't see anything going on there. But along with that and this idea of this new code, how is that going to work in the form-based code? How is that, something like we have planned for Hopkins Avenue, how are you going to, I mean, does that now have to wait until this is developed, or how is that working?
No, if the city had an initiative or a project already planned in place to go in and make street improvements, you know, adding pedestrian amenities and bike lanes and things like that, that would more than likely be encouraged by a form-based code, because you want it to be accessible by people on foot, people on bicycle, people in automobiles. So those kind of improvements where additional landscaping, additional streetscaping is added, that typically plays well into what a form-based code is encouraging and requiring.
I guess what I'm saying, we haven't seen any beginning yet for that streetscaping. And I'm just curious, you know, you just told me, okay, we're going to go ahead with that. So I guess that won't, if you adopt this, you're not going to wait. In other words, that process will start.
Oh, sure, yeah. By no means, the discussion of this form-based code will have no bearing on what happens along Hopkins. Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to get a little bit of research before I came here, and because I didn't understand form-based code, and I didn't want to I wanted to come and listen. I know this isn't an item that we're voting on, but I didn't want to shoot anything down because it's something new. I don't want to be that old man, you know, that now this is the way we've always done it and we should always do it, you know. But, so I'm looking at form-based code and I'm trying to understand it and what are the advantages versus multi-use versus development agreements, because that was what we've shifted to. And what I've seen from the past, and I've been on here for going on like 17 years, I've watched us shift over and over and over again on, now this isn't new, it's from the 80s as you put in your thing, but now the latest and greatest is multi-use zoning and development agreements, which locks it down, which gives you the same ability in large-scale developments, okay? So what is the advantages of that versus form-based code?
So you're very close. Basically, a development agreement is better utilized for very large projects that may take 30 years or so to develop, because in 30 years, I mean, you see how many, we process a lot of code changes and things like that just, you know, on a regular basis. So a development agreement works well for large-scale developments so that they are locked into one set of development standards for the entirety of the project, because they have planned for that and they want to make sure that they are vested for that. But you wouldn't want to do a development agreement for every small little 5,000 square foot lot in downtown, because you would have, every time a development came through, they'd have to go through a public hearing process, and that just opens the door for for confusion, and it
Right,
creates a
but that's why we have multi-zoning, downtown mixed use is a
And
good
so-
example, which is very, very free, I don't want to say freeing, but very liberal, I believe, in comparison.
It is compared to a lot of other zoning districts, which in a downtown area, you want to kind of have that freedom to allow people to have a wide variety of use on their property. And really what we have now has elements of a form-based code in it. There are, I mean, it talks about, encouraging mixed use and establishing maximum setbacks or allowing people to build right to the street. But what it lacks is,
Transitional,
it lacks the transitions. I was not here when the DMU code was written, but it was my understanding that it was done by a consultant and there wasn't a lot of public outreach. So it kind of allows a wide variety of things without also having the regulations that really control the use. The architectural standards are not very well defined, and so it allows for.
but that was brought up where you might have been one of the ones that said that. I remember bringing that up, or hearing that, not me. Somebody else was bringing up about they wanted more architectural standards.
Sure.
I thought you did. Anyway, okay, I got it. You answered my question. I don't want to go on too much. I just want to understand
Sure.
the differences, but because it just worries me that we're so invested on moving towards downtown mixed use, and I think it was Smart Streets, or gosh, we did a whole thing on
Complete streets.
complete streets, which I thought between downtown mixed use and complete streets was very similar to what the intent of what you're wanting to achieve with this.
Absolutely. Form-based codes have a lot of elements of complete streets. They have, like I said, our existing downtown mixed use, the DMU code, has a lot of elements of a form-based code, and I think it's not quite there yet. It has a lot of parts, but they're not all quite on the same page yet. And so it's not that really by adopting form-based code that we would totally be changing the allowable development standards in downtown. It would just paint a much clearer picture of them. And we really won't know that until you go through the public input process.
And what about, all right, let's just suppose, the mall is a perfect example. I mean, we probably went through 3, 4, 5 rewrites on what we're gonna get. All right, so how does it work on form-based when you want a waiver? When you say, hey, look, I want to go up 10 floors. I want to utilize something that is not within that scope.
So there can be, and again, this does not have to be done, but if it's agreed upon by everyone, that we'll give people 1 floor of leeway. If you just have a project that you just need a little bit of extra height to really make work, maybe that can be done so long as there are certain trade-offs made. But in terms of,
But then that makes no sense if you've laid out a plan and now you've deviated from that
And you don't
without
have-
public input.
in all honesty, you don't have to, if the code is written to be hard and fast, you shall not go above 3 floors, that can be written that way. You don't have to include those waivers in there, but you can if it's decided that that is the best option.
So how would a waiver be processed then?
I really can't answer because we don't have a code to, like, I don't have our code, what could be sitting in front of me. So all of that can be custom tailored through writing one of these. If it's determined that if someone wants to go above what's established, it has to come back before this board and city council, it can be written that way.
Yeah. 'Cause my issue with this is that we see, how many times have we denied a CUP?
Not, right.
And at the same time, it's kind of, we don't stick to our own plans, whether versus, I mean, I thought it was interesting that you talked about a 10-story building, because we actually did that under code-based. And that was one of my arguments, is that we put a 10-story condo next to a 1-story, and the other issue that I had with it at the time was that the value now, you've probably tripled, if quadrupled the value of that single home, and if they ever did a appraisal, now they can't even afford to pay their, and that was my fear at the time too.
Sure.
But, so I thought it was interesting that you brought that up, because I know that under code, under the current way, we've done that, which is more strict.
The
But-
current downtown mixed use does allow for buildings up to, I think, up to 10 floors.
Yeah,
If they
30
are-
density units.
If they are
an
part
acre.
of a transit-oriented development, which would be a whole nother development typology, but in general, what is allowed in downtown now is 5 stories, I think, in the uptown area, and maybe the downtown, and then midtown, which is everything south of South Street, I think is limited to 3. I could be wrong.
Pretty much
but-
after Garden is when we can go up,
Correct.
so.
And that, I think that was determined because the majority of the land up there is more or less vacant because of the old Sandpoint Plaza.
Yep.
And so that,
And the marina.
I think that through that process, they felt that if height was gonna go anywhere, it's gonna negatively impact, the least number of property owners if it was across that main
So-
corridor.
So speaking of that, currently under the current, you use zoning as transitional zoning. Under form-based, they use the words transition, but transition looks like it's more of a building.
It's transition through,
The uses could be extremely different. That's what I was seeing. I wasn't seeing just mixed use, I was seeing aggregate use. I mean, they're throwing in, everything. It just seemed that way.
and in certain areas, it may be that way. And those transitions, it can affect what the allowable uses are. It can affect building forms, certainly. And so, like I said, it really depends. There's so many different variables. I don't want to get too far into hypotheticals because we'll be here all
No.
night. But you're right. It can, if it's not addressed properly, it could allow an intense use so long as it fit within a building form. But at the same time, you can also control that through the form-based code as well.
So I understand that you definitely want to work on downtown with form-based codes. But at the same time, you're saying it has less public input. But at the same time, this is within a CRA district. So how is that possible within, being that it's in a CRA district that it's mandatory that you have meetings
Oh, well, I mean, the CRA would absolutely still meet. Yeah, it doesn't, it will,
on any, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out.
there has to be, the CRA has hearings and they discuss how monies will be spent within the
Yeah.
CRA and that sort of thing. But
Right.
how private development occurs doesn't necessarily have to
They
be
would-
approved.
You're saying that could be
On a
removed
parcel by
out
parcel
of
basis.
their meetings.
Yeah, because they really don't hear a lot of that now. So long as the development fits within the code now, they don't have to come to the CRA.
Okay. So I was looking at I was really trying to get the understanding of this. I even went to the Form-Based Code Institute, I think, and then I saw some of your documents,
Yeah.
your drawings for it, so I thought that was interesting. Honestly, I mean, I know from myself, my own thing, I would need more information, a better understanding.
Absolutely, and like I said, this was really just to get this conversation started. We will start this conversation as well with city council, and I think that before we get any direction, I think that we will certainly have to come back and get everyone a better understanding of what this will entail, including kind of the steps that may be required. How do we get from here to even getting to the adoption and that sort of thing. And so this was a very high level of how they differ from a traditional zoning code, but I will be more than happy if we get direction to move forward to bring back a much more detailed explanation.
One of the things that, I even went so far as to look at the Seaside, Florida, was the first community.
Yeah, and that's a
And-
new urbanist community, yeah.
And so what I've seen was, that was a blank slate. That was a clean slate. So that works good. I would compare that to the reason why Celebration was so
Sure.
successful is because it was a clean slate. But we don't have a clean slate. And so the form-based codes has the ability not to work, has to be more detrimental. So I just say, I don't want to say we shouldn't go forward, but I say, let's pause, get more information, and have a
Absolutely.
better understanding. You went to training for this, so you have the best understanding, but I'm just saying, I think all of us and city council will need more.
Absolutely.
Understanding.
And to kind of explain a little further on that, I'm sure that the form-based code for Seaside and for Celebration look entirely different than most any other form-based code that's been adopted by a city that was not built in a greenfield, because they have all the issues of what infrastructure's here, what roads are here, what buildings, and so we have, the Form-Based Code Institute has a comprehensive archive of every form-based code throughout the country, and so I'm glad of that, and because we now have examples of what are very good examples, what are not so good examples, and we can probably find something in a similar jurisdiction that have dealt with the same kind of issues that we will be dealing with, and we can use that as a basis of how did they solve this problem, how did they address this issue, that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so,
I've brought up this community a million times because I used to have to go up to Virginia, Hampton, Virginia. And it is one of the best communities I've ever been to. And part of that, and I was hoping that the mall was going to develop this way, where it had like 3 stories of condos. There's four stories, 3 stories of condos, complete small shops, whether it be yogurt shops, yoga, restaurants, clothing. And I thought, oh man, that would be so awesome. I would want to move there. But so I don't know if that was form-based, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. So I think it can be successful, but I think that we will still fall into the trap of, this is my property, this is what I need to make a living, and the plans aren't followed. And that has been one of the biggest problems in the CRA, I feel, is that the plan hasn't been followed. So we don't have a Cocoa Village set up like we want.
But I think that has to do with what you were saying about grandfathering and, things like that.
a lot of it, like I said, depends on, a lot of questions I can't answer right now because I don't know what the code will look like at the end of the day. But yeah, and regardless, even if you had the most stringent code, all that, it just takes time to create that kind of environment because, like I said, a form-based code will allow someone to take advantage of the market if the market's there, but it's not going to create a market that isn't there. And so, and really no
Well, I guess
regulatory environment can do that.
For me is, how do we stay on plan? Because we always go off our plan, and then we complain. I hear people complain about, why isn't Titusville this, why isn't Titusville that? And it's because we never, and it's not the city's fault. It's not, I mean, I'm not saying it's any one person's fault. It's understandable that people want to make money at their property. They have that right, and they should, but the overall impact, it's like small changes. Sure. So, I'm done.
And we can certainly address those or try to address those kinds of issues through the drafting of the code. I really don't have an answer for it, but knowing that has been an issue in the past, that's something that can try to be addressed, and the code can be custom tailored for that.
Okay. Vice Chairman?
I don't want to go too far off track, okay? But something occurred to me when the chairman was talking about how you remove and change places, buildings, structures, So if you were to follow this code and some properties got in the way, what happens there?
Again, it really depends on how the code is written and the will of the governing bodies to stick to what's adopted. At the training I was at, they discussed options where people came in with that and people are just adamantly against, I just don't want to develop that way. I want to do what I want to do. And some cities, amend their code and allow that person to do what they want, even though that's not what was originally envisioned. And other places just say, we're sorry, we have set these regulations in place to accomplish a specific goal, and that it is what it is, and they don't change. So it really, there's a lot of variables that go into it. There just isn't one answer for it.
So, I don't want to beat this horse to death, but I'm just curious. So if you go into condemnation proceedings against an owner for a property, how does that work per se? I mean, if there's something in the way and you want to start planning for your city development, and you have a property or 2 or several properties that need to be displaced, how does that actually work?
Well, the implementation of regulations like this wouldn't require the city to remove any structures like that. I mean, we're not talking about eminent domain or anything like that. Nothing to deal with how property is developed would require, that I can foresee, the city to acquire property. Now, there might be a specific project that would require that, but just implementing a set of regulations would not require that kind of action on behalf of the city.
I know something, like, in New York, they do that. You know, they actually go in and decide they want to tear up a neighborhood, which they're in the process of doing. Sure. So, the whole neighborhood goes. I think it's just, I saw a news reel that's recent, and it's just amazing that they can level, I don't know how many blocks it was just unbelievable.
Sure.
Just when you took everything down.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm just curious where we're standing at this point on Royal Oak and the Imperial Towers. Are there any updates on that? I know, I'm sorry, to continue more on this go for yourself, but it just happened to occur to me.
Unless you all have more questions, I'm done with that, with my piece of that one.
My information is the same as it was at the last meeting. There's no change as far as I'm aware with Royal Oak nor Bay Towers.
So, the city isn't pursuing anything at this point with those properties? I mean, there's no litigation, no condemnation of the buildings? I mean, are they just going to let them sit there until something, I mean, what happens here?
There is no current code enforcement violation against the property at Bay Towers, if that's what you're asking.
They've been making improvements to the buildings there.
It
at
looks
Bay
like they
Tower.
have.
They have.
Yeah.
They've been working with the building department and the legal staff to try to.
There's no current violation that's being addressed at this time. So that property is currently in foreclosure and that litigation is ongoing. There's no change. No.
Okay, was there any other discussion on this? All right, thank you.
Thank you all for your input. Yeah. Okay, you ready for the next? All right.
Yes, please.
Next item starts on page 30, and this is an ordinance dealing with community centers, and I'll read the summary here and then I'll explain the text changes. On April 24th, 2018, the City Council approved advisability for staff to consider expanding the zoning districts in which community centers could be located. The current regulations limit community centers to the urban mixed-use, Indian River City commercial, and downtown mixed-use zoning districts. Staff is proposing regulations related to community centers to be expanded as follows. And the list you see there, we're proposing to expand them as a conditional use in the residential zoning districts and shoreline mixed-use zoning district, as a permitted use in generally the commercial zoning districts that you see there, HMT. GU is actually the general use zoning district, so that's not strictly commercial. And then as a limited use within the neighborhood commercial, community commercial, regional commercial, and several of the regional mixed-use districts. The use table is on page 32, but the text changes actually start on page 37 of your packet. And so what you see there is anything that is stricken in red is proposed to be removed, and anything that's underlined is proposed to be added. And so we are establishing a definition of a community center, and then the associated regulations for them are located under subsection C and the highlighted language there. And so basically what this would allow for is the operation of a community center by a government, public agency, or nonprofit organization where community functions can be held, social gatherings, educational or commercial cultural activities. And so a community center based on the definition we have here, a community center will not be considered the same as an event center or a civic center or those other types of buildings that are predominantly used for non-community members and they're, like for rent type events. So a community center would be something small where residents could gather and have, an HOA meeting or something like that, but it wouldn't be a big for rent facility that you could have like large parties or anything like that at. And with that, try to answer any questions.
Okay, let's open this to the public and close this to the public. Hey, I gotta do it the right way. Member Baker.
Okay, so with your last statement, if you had, like, say, one of the subdivisions in town wanted to have a community center for their members, so they also, most of the ones that I've seen, they have a large room, because that's usually what works best.
Mhm.
They quite often use it for parties and various things, and they often rent it out. So where's the difference?
The purpose on this would be to, it's not to say that you couldn't go have a social gathering in there, but it would not be intended to be a for rent, money producing center. So like, yeah, sure, if someone that lives in the neighborhood wants to have their children's birthday party there or something like that, that would be something that the community center may be used for, but it's not intended to be a purpose-built assembly use that is rented out every weekend and, you know, requires a lot of extra infrastructure to accommodate it. That's where we were going with this. If you don't feel the definition is written accurately enough to kind of separate those out, we will gladly take any recommendations and reconsider that. This was just, you know, council directed us to do this. This is the definition that we came up with. We thought it was clear, but that doesn't always mean that it is. So, like I said, the intent is really to create a small-scale facility that can be used for a wide variety of things, but is not, like I said, is not intended to be like a money-producing event center that's busy all the time, that sort of thing. It's really for the use of the community, and by community, like the neighborhood or things like that, where the center is located.
To me, right now, I don't think, I understand what you're trying to get to.
Mhm.
And I don't have a problem with that. But what I'm saying is, I think without something else added to it, it would just be real easy just for a neighborhood to say, you know, let's just go ahead and make it pay for itself.
Sure, understood.
And so I personally think you ought to, and I don't have any recommendations on how to get there, unfortunately.
No, that's
But
okay.
I just think it needs a little extra there.
Okay.
Member Noel Copeland.
My first question is, you said city council asked that you look into this. Do you know what the impetus for that request was? Is there a specific group or something that is interested in opening a community center that we're looking to accommodate here?
It's my understanding that I don't remember the exact property, but it's one of the properties that is west of downtown over here. I believe it's a property located over near Robbins and Main Street. There's a nonprofit group that is interested in establishing a center that offers a place for people in the area they would offer like some after-school programs, or a place that kids could go and do homework, get assistance, maybe have counselors or something come in periodically and provide a little bit have a facility that people could meet with a counselor or something if they don't have the means to go to an office or things like that. And so it would serve a variety of purposes, but that's the reason that this originally came up. And so rather than just say in one specific zoning district, this is okay, we wanted to take a broader look at it and say, well, if it's okay here, is it really such a bad thing elsewhere? And I guess one thing I should go back and hit on a little bit too is that in terms of like a neighborhood having one of these, that is a common thing, that they have a little community center built as part of the development. Actually in all of the single family zoning districts and the multifamily, if something like this was to be established, it does require a conditional use permit. So it wouldn't just
Well,
be.
that was one of my next questions, was can I just get together with my neighbors and buy a house that's on my street?
Right.
And that's our community center?
It wouldn't be a by right use in that situation, no. That would require.
So it's not then,
Well, it would be a conditional use, so it may be allowable, but you have to go through the process of a conditional use, which would come before this body and city council. And so through that, then us as staff and.
so that's the first bullet there as a conditional use in those
Right.
zoning districts?
Correct.
Okay.
In the agenda item, yes. And so in the commercial zoning districts, it may not be such a big deal because most of the properties already have parking, they have good access, that sort of thing. So we were trying to create different levels of how these can be permitted to address those kind of concerns that, yeah, you don't buy a neighboring house and now all of a sudden it's, you know,
The
a
party
totally
house.
different use. Yeah, exactly.
My next question is, you said in the definition, it says operated by a government, public agency, or nonprofit organization. What's the definition of a public agency?
I don't know that we define that in our code.
Okay, so we
So that's
should.
something I will look into.
And the nonprofit organization, I would say, if it's not a government or public, I was taking to mean like some municipal agency maybe.
Okay.
I don't know if that's what the intent is, but I would say for the nonprofit organizations, those would have to get approval each time
Okay.
to confirm that it is something that we would want in the community.
Okay.
There are multiple nonprofit organizations
sure.
that are not something we would want in our community.
Sure.
What do you mean by municipal?
Well, I was trying to figure out what public agency meant, and the only thing I could come up with that wasn't government would be like, you know, something that's a city-run, something that, but that wasn't, like, it wasn't the city of Titusville something, but it was like, you know, the Titusville Renaissance Group. You know, that might be a public agency, but not a government agency. Do you
Okay.
see what I mean? I don't know what the intent is. That was my question. But my bigger issue was for the nonprofit piece. I think that should be approved on a case by case. And then in D, standards for conditional use, the last line says it may be approved by obtaining a conditional use. I think you want it to say it must be approved by conditional use.
That's actually just standard language that we use throughout the code. Because of where it's located under standards for conditional uses. Yeah, there isn't an option to, I don't feel like it, it's a
Okay,
requirement,
just
yeah.
the word may makes it sound like it's optional.
I understand, yeah.
Okay.
But that is I shouldn't say but that's standard language that we use throughout the rest of the LDRs.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, so, I'm glad you asked about where it came from, and, I wanted the background as well. But I actually have an issue with this in any residential, with the exception of multifamily. Multifamily, I mean, I think that's fine. Residential manufacturer, that's fine. Shoreline mixed use would be fine because it's a mixed use and it's commercial. But I believe that community centers need to be whether a true community, which is separate from the city. It's a development that's pre-established at the time. And here's why. Anytime you open up the possibility for a community center to open up, you're going to end up with another Hopkins. Not another Hopkins, but businesses on Hopkins and on Garden were taking residential buildings and converting them into businesses. Now, some people believe that that's perfectly acceptable. The problem I have with that is the character of the neighborhood is not that. Community centers are a commercial venture, and they really are. I know this from past experience because I was president of the JCs for a long time. We rent them out. You have to pay for it. It has to pay for itself, and they will. So I think that I can't support anything with residential component, even with a conditional use, because at the end of the day, you have to give consideration to the residents as well as the intent changes after you get approval.
Sure. And just to clarify, are you specifically referring to the RE through the R1C, like the single-family zoning districts?
Yeah, exactly. All
Okay.
through until you get to mobile homes.
Okay, so even R2?
Or no, R2 is fine.
Okay,
Well, no, I would say R3 and on.
okay.
Because think R2 is medium residential.
It's multifamily, but it's a lesser density.
Well, okay, then R2.
Okay.
That's my issues, and that's why I can't support this, because I just feel that you're opening up a problem. You're opening up a loophole that will create a problem. The answer, in my opinion, is if you want to place it there, then rezone it. And if it's not appropriate for the zoning, then it's not appropriate for CUP, because, as I previously said, CUPs generally are not denied, although sometimes they should be.
Understood.
So that was my 2 cents. But I'm one vote. I say that all the time. So whatever you guys.
I did just want to say, if you would like to include those in whoever makes a motion on this, if you would like to include, clarifying the definition, what the chairman brought up about excluding certain zoning districts, just please do so in the motion.
Okay. All right. Is there any other discussion on this or any other questions? All right.
Do we have to approve it or not right now, or can we ask that they bring it back with?
You have the option to table it, or you do, but you can make the conditions. Here's the facts. You can add conditions, and it's a recommendation. Table it, and you bring it back, and then it'll go to city council at a later date. But either way, it's going to go to council with or without the recommendations. I mean, it's.
Yeah, but like, it sounds like we're not clear on some of the definitions.
If
So if we say, I don't know how to make like
Oh,
we
if you all-
stated, we're not sure how to make it better, the definition, it's just not clear enough right now, so.
Right.
What I would recommend is that since this item has been advertised and scheduled to be heard by city council, the way it's been presented, the city has the ability to modify the definitions that within the scope of the ordinance title. Taking away certain zoning categories would probably be permissible. I think that they would be permissible to do that. And so within the scope of the advertisement that's already been made, if this group doesn't provide a recommendation, then city council's hands will be tied and they won't be able to move forward. However, in the reverse, if you provide a recommendation with modifications, then they can entertain them and they can direct staff to proceed, or they can make their decision to ignore you and move forward with the ordinance as it's been presented. And it's entirely up to the council to make that decision. Unless you don't make a decision tonight, then they don't have that ability to go forward with the advertisement that we've spent money on. So for that point of consideration, I think it would be helpful for this group to provide a recommendation that the council could listen to with your suggested modifications. So it's up to you to decide what to do, but that's my advice.
Well, you look like you have the floor on this. I mean, you want to move forward. Honestly, I look at it like this, and the tabling for me, and generally I am all about saving the city money. On items like this, though, I look at the damage that it can happen. I'm not too worried about it being re-advertised if we do table it and for, corrections, but that's just, I know community centers well. I've done them. So they can become a problem. And as a matter of fact, I was called out many times because we rented out to a group, and I thought they were great people, and they were, but they got carried away. And it's not. Sometimes you have one group that has the greatest intent, and then you have others that don't. So.
And so if your recommendation is to table it, I would also ask that you give specific direction on how you want staff to come back with changes for second review.
Okay. I mean, I'm good with however you want to move forward, but you have to have motion.
Well, so it sounds like you want to take out,
I would like to take out the residential component from RE to R1.
I think R1C.
R1C all the way.
Yeah,
Okay. That's what I had written in my notes.
R1C.
So we're talking about taking out those, we're talking about getting a better definition on page 37B, right?
That's
Make-
also what I had. Yeah.
Making the nonprofits have to have approval case by case.
Yes. And that's what they had in there, yes. They had a conditional for most of that. And then on the others, it was permitted and limited.
So are there any other changes we want to recommend?
I mean, that was my only blaring issue for me.
If you choose to, I would like clarification as to what you mean by nonprofits should be approved on a case-by-case basis. Like through I guess how,
I thought you meant by conditional use.
okay, I just want to be clear on that.
Yeah, the way that I was understanding this was any of these three groups could put a community center on the permitted use area without any kind of additional approvals, correct?
Yeah, so long as it was either a permitted by right use or a permitted use with limitations, that would be correct.
Right,
yeah.
so I'm just saying for that subset, the nonprofits, that
Okay.
they have to get an approval
Okay,
case by case before they were allowed to open their community center.
thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion?
I'm trying to make, yes, I would like to make a motion that we approve the ordinance relating to community centers with the requested changes.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we take a vote on this? Baker.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker? Yes. Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes.
Okay, let's see, we did item C, item D.
Airports and airparks.
Yes.
Don't even talk about it 7 times?
Please no. Yeah, we're not quite sure what was going on there. I think it's something in our agenda software. But anyways, this item 9D, starts on page 50. You got it? Got it? Okay. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. That's all right. Okay, so this is an ordinance relating to airport and air park regulations. And I'll read this summary and then kind of try to do an explanation because this does get complicated. By adopting ordinance number 27-2003, council adopted regulations and associated exhibits, in this case maps and some required submittal documents, creating a number of protection zones adjacent to the Space Coast Regional Airport and Arthur Dunn Air Park. With subsequent adoption of ordinance number 25-2007, several exhibits were inadvertently omitted from the code during the codification process. The intent of this proposed ordinance that we're about to review is to reinstate the exhibits adopted in 2003, that original adoption of the overlays. These exhibits include the airport height notification zone, airport runway protection zone, restricted zones for educational facilities, and easement waiver of claims notice of disclosure map. And so in general, what this was is that the city originally adopted these regulations by ordinance 27-2003. And so originally, ordinance number 27-2003 provided protection for the Space Coast Regional Airport, the airport in the southern portion of the city. Then ordinance 25-2007 was created and adopted to more or less provide those same protections for the Arthur Dunn Air Park up here just off of Garden Street. However, when ordinance 25-2007 was adopted and sent to Municode erroneously excluded the maps that we are talking about tonight. And so when we were going through the code update process in 2016, we noticed that there were maps that were referenced, but we could never find them, and so we just thought they were never created. So we recreated them and put them in the code as the best we could tell. However, after we went back and did the history of all this research, we found that The exhibits were originally created. It was just an error whenever all of this was codified after the adoption of Ordinance 25-2007, that's when the issue started. And so this ordinance is not intended to change any of the regulations. It's not intended to add any new regulations, anything like that. It's just simply trying to clarify the mess that had been created from various ordinances being adopted. And that's why you see several maps, the maps that I read off earlier. The rest of the changes that you see, more or less, is a lot of clarification of, making things plural, correcting the title of the Board of Adjustment and Appeals, things of that nature. So I'm not going to read through every single one of those. One thing that is referenced in here, in the last map on here, the notice of disclosure, what is it called? The abrogation easement waiver of claims notice of disclosure maps. That is one that it's been in effect since the original adoption in 2003. And what that is it requires different documents be presented to anyone that buys property within, a certain area of the airport, basically stating that you're near an airport and it could be noisy and those sorts of things. And so that is a map that that's being reinstated, and the documents that go along with that are on file with the city, but we're not codifying them into the code just in case they do ever need to be updated in coordination with the airport authority. But they are still required to be submitted as part of through the development process. And this map regulates where each document has to be submitted.
Can you say that again about the maps aren't going to be added?
Basically, yeah, all the maps that you see illustrated in here, they're being inserted back into the code.
Yes.
And we're not changing the maps, we just recreated them and are now inserting them via an ordinance.
Okay.
Because they were originally excluded in error.
I thought you were saying you weren't adding them.
No,
I was like,
that's why they're in here. Yeah, they're getting added back in there.
Is that it?
That's all I have. Like I said, I know that's kind of confusing, and it was confusing for us as well,
will
but.
Open it up to the public and close it to the public. So I'm glad I don't feel like when I first saw this, I was like, well, I recall doing this, but I didn't really recall it from 2003 with the maps. And what instigated a lot of these maps was Sculpture Charter School. But my understanding of this is that this is more of a notification when they want to go high.
That's certainly part of it. That's one of the maps that you see there. It's got various rings illustrated on it. And so, yeah, there's different notification requirements. If you want to surpass that allowable height, you have to get approval basically from FAA and the airport authority and those sorts of things. So
My issue with part of this, though, was with Donna Air Park, because it was classified as air park, not airport. Because when you take these maps, and you're not seeing this because we're looking screen by screen, but you put those across each other, it literally swaths a huge section of Titusville.
it does.
Almost all of it.
Mhm.
Well, but just a little bit of a sliver. And it worries me because Donna Air Park is not that's more of a play park, I mean, there's not a,
It's more for recreational purposes, and that's why it was given the air park designation. That was the airport authority wanted to make that differentiation, and so that's why it was carried forward that way.
I do have issues, but this was something that was agreed upon. It's really kind of above us anyway.
Yeah, it was an agreement between the city and the airport authority. Yeah,
Well, I'm saying though that back in the day, it was like, the Space Coast was a definite because it was kind of, I want to put this. Sculptor wasn't supposed to be there. It was only supposed to be there temporary. They came in and they said, we're only going to be there for 6 months, and then we got another building, and then they stayed there permanent. And the airport was very, very angry, very upset. They protested it the entire time. It was a problem, and so they got in under the original, we promised we're going to move, and they didn't.
Mhm.
And then this came about. the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because I guess I forgot about how stringent it was. I thought it was limited on more for Dunn Airport, but apparently it's not. It's the same.
So you're absolutely right that the height obstruction zones do cover a vast majority of the city. However, as soon as you get out very far away from the airport, they do start going up in height pretty dramatically. So the furthest out ring that you see there would only be considered a height obstruction if it was a 200-foot tall structure, which we don't have any of in the city. And so it does impact a large amount of the city. And like I said before, we're not changing the boundaries of these right now. And there is in the code methods or procedures that you can go to the airport authority and FAA and explain that, I'm not impacting air traffic at all, and they can give you a waiver from that.
I knew the hotel over on US 1 and over by the Boeing building, they were acceptable to that. I think they're more concerned with their runways and.
Right.
But I guess when you do look at it though, it's like, oh my gosh, Not that I want us to always go up, but I still believe that. Actually, I've been a person on this board that's been against going up, especially on the river, but, so, not that I'm changing anything, it's just, I wanted to make sure, and so, okay.
Sure.
Okay, that's all I had. Are there questions or comments? Okay, can we take a vote on this? Lori? Oh, sorry. I didn't think you heard me or something.
Well, we need a motion on this.
Yeah, we need a motion.
Boy, I'm like ready to go, aren't I? Jeez. My apologies. Can we get a motion on this?
I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance relating to airport and air park regulations.
Can we get a second? Okay. Sorry, can I, well, I'm saying sorry a lot tonight. Can we get a vote?
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Wait,
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. They really got ahead on that one, huh?
That's all right. Okay, so let's see. That was item D. Item E. Okay, so this is an ordinance relating to assembly uses and recreation and commercial amusements and churches. And so this one is an ordinance that accomplishes two different things. And I'm just going to go down to, I'm going to skip over the large use table there. I'm going to be reading from page 220 in the highlighted language there. So in here, on page 220, you see that we've made one correction, which is just a cross-reference in the code. You see the 123 stricken in 110/childcare facilities. That's just a correction to a cross-reference in the code. That's not a changing any regulation. On the following page, on page 221, excuse me, this is we're correcting an error on this. So you see we've added the word "and general use zoning district." When you look at the use table up above on page 220, we've always had a C for a conditional use for a church within the general use zoning district. We simply just forgot to include to note the general use zoning district in subsection D. And again, we were fixing that error in the cross-reference. So that's the first part of that. It's more or less just cleaning up a couple errors that we found as we were going through this ordinance process. The second part under section 28-275, which starts at the very bottom of page 221 and continues on to 222. This is related to, this commission made a use interpretation for a piece of property on Fox Lake Road. It was for basically an event venue within the general use zoning district. And so it was recommended by this commission that we explore the option of making this a conditional use permit. And so that's what this ordinance is accomplishing, or attempting to accomplish. And so underneath here, we have recreation and commercial amusement indoor. And so that's the use, the conditional use that was before you tonight. It's those sorts of assembly type uses are what trigger these sorts of CUPs. And so what you see changing in the use table here on page 221 and 222 is we've added a C under general use to allow a recreation and commercial amusement indoor as a conditional use. And then we've established the regulations that you see on page 222 under subsection C. And those are related to basically the size of the property, how the buffers have to be established, maximum capacity for the overall facility, that they have to provide a conceptual site plan and things like that. And so again, the reason that we brought this back after we received advisability from council was based on that use interpretation that was made for that property on Fox Lake Road. And so with that, I'll try and answer any questions that you have.
All right, I only had one question. It's over, let's see, it is page 222, where you're adding in for conditional uses, see if I got this right. I want to understand, it says shall, for number D, it's C1D. Okay. Shall not allow vehicle access from local street unless maximum occupant capacity of the facility is no more than 400 persons. I'm trying to understand what that requirement is, because the requirement is for a church, for a large church was 400 is the threshold.
Correct.
And so I'm trying to understand this requirement.
And we have a very similar requirement for churches up above. Actually, it's the exact same standard, yeah. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do here is that, local roads, which are more or less your neighborhood streets and that sort of thing, have a limited vehicular capacity on them. And so we wanted to control how large of a venue could be located off of one of these local streets. So you didn't have a venue with a 3,000 person capacity trying to access it via a street that wasn't built for that kind of traffic load. And so that's why we carried it over to this use, is because it's very similar to what is already in the code for churches. And so we felt that was again, an appropriate regulation to put in place to help protect those sorts of uses and the surrounding uses.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to understand is at 400 persons, they have to get a CUP for a church, right?
In certain zoning districts. In some zoning districts, a church requires a CUP regardless of how many people. And that would be for like residential neighborhoods and things like that. Okay. But in a commercial zoning district, if you have less than 400 people, you don't have to get a CUP for a church.
Yes.
Right.
But I'm just trying to understand the requirement where it's saying shall not allow vehicle access from a local street. Unless if,
it's always been there.
So it's basically, if I have a church, I think we even talked about churches and homes. As long as my church is under 400 people, I can use local streets.
Correct. But in some zoning districts, such as, let's say that you had and we have some of these, if you have a church on a piece of property that's zoned RE, residential estate, regardless, it's an allowable use, but it requires a CUP regardless of the number of people you have. If you have 10, 100, or 400, it all requires a conditional use permit because it's a residential zoning district. And so through the code update, we did change that. It used to be that every church, regardless of size or zoning district, required a conditional use permit. And we felt that that wasn't appropriate because in certain zoning districts, there's already adequate infrastructure in place to support up to 400. And the reason we chose 400 is because that's whenever traffic impacts and building issues often come into play. And so we chose that as the threshold. And so we're carrying that forward now to this use because it's in the general use zoning district, which is typically lower intensity and out on kind of the fringe areas of the city. If that answers your question.
I mean, it kind of makes, in my mind, I say to myself, I'm like, so as long as I have $3.99, I don't trip that, and I can do whatever I want. But if I hit 400, then I have to go get a conditional use permit. But then this is saying that we can't use that street anymore.
We just couldn't, it's not saying that you
It's saying
couldn't use that street, you
We
just,
require it, but it's saying that we can't.
for an event center in the GU zoning district, it's always gonna require a conditional use permit, regardless, again, of how big the facility is, whether it's only designed for 50 people or for 400. It always requires a CUP. What this is saying is, if you request a CUP and you're on a local road, the maximum occupant capacity of the building cannot exceed 400 people. And that's determined by
Okay.
using the Florida Building Code.
Okay. Member Noel Copeland.
So, this one confuses me only because I feel like it covers a whole bunch of different things, and I'm not sure. In the title, it says related to recreational and commercial amusement and churches. Then in the opening paragraph, it talks about banquet centers.
That is where you're adding in for
For
the
staff to
GU.
consider banquet centers as a conditional use.
I think that's because that was the title of the use that was used for the use interpretation. Can I use the word use a few more times? But I believe that's what the property on Fox Lake Road was wanting. They coined it as a banquet center. That's what they considered it. Really, it falls under the use that it most closely falls under in our zoning code is a recreation and commercial amusement indoor, and it's because it's an assembly type use.
But is this whole thing related to churches?
No. The reason churches were included in this is because we were correcting a couple errors related to churches within the GU zoning district. That's the first section that I talked about.
But it says, like, on the correction where it says childcare, it says childcare if the childcare facility is proposed in association with the church.
Correct. So the section of the zoning code that's under section 28236, which is just a little bit further up on that page. Those are all the regulations we have for churches. That section of the
But this whole thing is not about churches.
correct.
So
This
then the back part,
is about the event center or banquet center.
but the banquet or event center can or cannot be associated with a church.
I guess it could be yeah.
For what it's worth, if you look at page 221 where it talks about churches, the reason that section was addressed in this ordinance is because it was used in the analysis specific to the 400-person capacity. And as the city analyzed that, if you look at the chart above it on page 220, you see that GU has that C on it. It was already conditional for a church to be conditional in the general use section of the zoning code. But if you look at the paragraph for the categories that it's allowed, general use was not listed as one of the named zoning categories. And so the amendment included 228 because it wanted to identify those inconsistencies and correct them. And the only reference to childcare facilities is because 123 was the wrong number. And
Right.
so we're just editing Scrivener's
I
errors.
just got confused about what
And it's
all
very
is
confusing, yeah, but the
being
child
A lot of different terminology, yeah.
the
Okay.
child care facilities is just a correction of a reference that was incorrect in
Yeah.
the
Okay.
churches section.
So-
So the intent is not to amend the church's use whatsoever.
Okay, I was just trying to figure out if it's only churches or event centers within churches, like I was just trying to figure out what
So
the.
this could be a standalone event center, or if it so happened, I guess it could be one that was associated with a church, if it happened that way. But it's not specifically limited in that manner to only an event center associated with a church.
Okay,
Right.
And to also address the chair's comments regarding the 400-person capacity, my recollection from my participation in the staff conversations is it was also addressing the public services. If a fire truck was needed to go to one of those events, the capacity is an issue if it's a local road.
Well, I guess where I was trying to understand it was the code allows you to do it at 399, but once you hit 400, then it's saying, It just seemed kind of odd.
Because that language exists for churches, that was a standard that's
Yeah.
already acceptable in our code, and we
I know.
duplicated it for this use because it's so similar to the
I mean,
occupancy of a church.
I get it. It's just, it seems odd.
And like I said, it's gonna require a
But
conditional use.
You're correct.
It's gonna require conditional use permit regardless of the capacity load. However, we wanted to have some sort of upper maximum threshold for, like, as Chelsea was saying, for emergency services and to make sure that the roadways that are in place don't get overwhelmed by continual use of a facility such as this.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's just like, that doesn't matter. Thank you.
So my last question is, if these changes were already in the code, would the Little Ninjas have needed to come to get their conditional use permit? Or would they have been fine under this new code? Because I don't think that they fall under these stipulations of a conditional use.
So these regulations, all the language you see highlighted there in red on page 222 only apply to the general use zoning district. So since the Titusville Mall is located in the RC zoning, they would have still had to come get a CUP, because these regulations that we're proposing only apply to the GU zoning district, not the RC zoning district.
Gotcha.
So they would have still been required to get a CUP.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Is there a motion on this item? I could pass the gavel. Is there a motion on this? I'm looking at you now. Somebody? Anybody?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Member Baker's made a motion.
Hold on just a second.
Okay.
Do you have a number for that?
It
Because I'm
is,
not doing too well finding it at the moment.
nope, it's not on there. Here, I'll go back up.
Yeah, I'm having to do that too.
The ordinance number is
16.
16-2018.
I'd like to recommend approval of ordinance number 16-2018.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, can we have a vote on this?
Member Baker?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. Okay,
I think that's it.
that it is. Reports.
I don't have anything else to add tonight.
City Attorney.
No update from me.
Okay. Petitions from request public present. Okay. We'll go to Member Baker. Did you like to say anything else tonight?
I'd love to.
Okay, Vice Chairman Shavir.
No report.
Member Noel Copeland. No report. I had one question. Only thing I have, why is the road by Arby's and why is that locked down? Like,
It's my understanding, I don't know the specifics, but it's my understanding that I believe a sanitary sewer line has failed, and it's a gravity line, so it's very deep underground, and they're trying to get it figured out to where they can safely get a crew in there to fix it, because once they start digging down, especially with all the rain we've been having, basically the hole just keeps collapsing. So
Okay.
they're working on it, but that is why it's a line that they're trying to figure out exactly what's going to be required before they open everything up and have to have it exposed for a long amount of time.
okay.
Is that what's going on? Can you tell me what's going on right behind City Hall?
At Main and Indian River.
Yeah, where the road's been blocked for a while.
Yeah, that's the installation of a baffle box, so that will help. It helps with our water quality, our runoff quality, the nutrients and any kind of trash and that kind of stuff gets intercepted by that, and then the rainwater then proceeds out into the lagoon, and that will be cleaned on a regular basis. There's several other ones in the city that have been installed, I think, over the past several years, but that's what's going on.
Do you have any idea when that will be finished?
They are hoping by the end of June, but I think part of the reason it's taken this long is, again, the rain. It's hard to pour concrete and that sort of thing when it's raining.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we're adjourned. Thank you.
all for coming